All right, now let's see how we can use actions. So here in app components template, I'm going to add a button, call it increment, handle the click event, and bind this to the increment method of our component. I'm also going to add a counter here. So when we click this button, this counter is going to be incremented. Now let's go to app component, declare counter here and initialize it to 0. And then add the increment method. So in a typical Angular app, this is how we implement this method. We modify the state directly here. However, when using the Redux architecture, we don't modify the state here. Instead, we dispatch an action. This action goes in the store. The store knows our root reducer, so it passes the action to the root reducer. And then the reducer looks at the action, and based on the type of the action, it will return a new state. And then the store will update its state internally. So let's see how we can implement this. First, I'm going to go on top of this file and import ng-redux from ng2-redux. So this is the primary type that we work with in Redux applications. Now I'm going to create a constructor and inject ng-redux here, ng-redux. Now you remember that this is a generic type. So here we need to specify a generic argument, which is iapp state. That's the interface that determines the shape of our store. So I'm going to import iapp state on the top. Like this. Now back in the constructor, I'm going to apply the private modifier here so we can access this in the increment method. Now instead of modifying the state directly, we're going to call this.ngredux.dispatch. Here we need to pass an action object. And as you learned earlier, an action is a simple object that has a type property. So this is how we dispatch an action. Now some actions may carry extra data about the event that just happened. For example, if the user posted a message, here you can have properties like body, subject, and so on. But in this example, we don't have to worry about that. So delete. Now every time we define a new action, we need to go to our reducer and determine how the state will change in response to that action. So let's go to store. Here I'm going to add a switch statement on action.type. And if it's increment, I'm going to return a new state with updated counter. So currently it's not clear what is the type of this state object. So I'm going to apply a type here. This should be of type iapp state. So we get the current state of the store and then we'll return a new state. So again, I'm going to add a type here. This function will return iapp state. And now because we need to work with a counter, we need to store its current value in the store. So in iapp state interface, I'm going to declare a property counter of type number. Okay. And now in response to the increment action, I'm going to return a new object with counter set to state.counter, which is the current value of the counter plus 1. So note that I'm not modifying the original state here. I'm returning a new state. And the final step. Earlier in app module, here we passed the initial state of our store. Now we have a red underline here because our store now has a counter property that we have not initialized. So back in app module, I'm going to set counter to 0. So let's quickly review the steps and then I will show you how to improve this code. In the app component, we injected ng-redux in the constructor, and in the increment method, instead of modifying the state directly, we dispatched an action. Then we went to our store, we modified the root reducer, and added support for the increment action. Now, as part of this, we also had to modify iAppState. So now we have this counter property. And finally, in the app module, we modified this line here to set the initial state of our store. Now, there are a couple of things we can improve in this code. The first issue I see here is the use of this magic string in two different places. We have used this in the app component and also in the store. Now, the problem with this is that we have duplicated this in two different places, and if we have a typo in the code, our code is not going to work. So it's better to extract this into one place, define it as a constant. So this way we won't have a typo problem, and if you want to change this to something else in the future, there is only one place we need to change. So in the app folder, I'm going to add a new file called actions. And here I'm going to export a constant called increment and set it to increment. Now we can replace those two magic strings with this constant. So first in the store on the top, I'm going to import increment from actions. And then I'm going to replace this magic string here, increment. Now to save time, I'm going to copy this line and go to app component. On the top, paste it. And once again, replace this magic string with a constant. That's the first improvement. Now the second improvement. You notice that when we changed iAppState here, we had to go to the app module and modify this initial state object here. So we are going back and forth between different files, and this is really not good practice. So let's go back to the store. Here I'm going to export a constant and call it initial state. This is of type iAppState, and I'm going to set this to this object with counter set to 0. Now next time we're going to modify the iAppState interface, we can immediately modify this initial state if necessary. We don't have to jump back and forth between the store and the app module. So now let's go to the app module and import initial state from the store, and then replace this object here with initial state. Now, if you run the application at this point and click this button, the counter is not incremented, because we have only implemented the part for updating the state. Reading the state from the store is something else, and that's what we're going to look at in the next lecture.